Always, it's a great honor to rise and represent the people of Timmins James Bay. And what we are talking about today needs to be very much put in perspective, because the Liberals will present this as this kind of he said, she said. We had Jerry Butts try to present it like it was one of those episodes on Friends, that maybe if he'd been a bit more sensitive at the time, if, he'd allowed her to just speak more, she wouldn't have slammed the door on the way out. We had the Prime Minister do this ridiculous statement about, being more compassionate in his cabinet. What we're talking about is the corrosive power of the 1%. That this Prime Minister has been willing to burn through his credibility, that people believed him in 2015 for openness, for reconciliation, for feminism, for doing politics differently, for showing us that it wasn't going to be the backroom politics of Stephen Harper or the cronyism of Jean Chrétien, but he's shown a willingness to give us the worst of both worlds, because it was about helping his friends at SNC-Lavalin. And he stood in this house day after day after day and told us it was about 9,000 jobs. And we now know that that was false, because we never saw the Prime Minister stand up for any jobs when they were Stelco workers or Sears workers or oil sands workers. But why not Stelco or Steel? Because their pensions were being given over to the family business of Murnau Chappelle. This is about the power of the 1%. And now we have the OECD stating internationally that all the alarm bells are ringing over the interference by this Prime Minister in the international bribery case against SNC-Lavalin. And the Prime Minister's office just a few days ago responded to the OECD and promised him a robust, independent set of hearings. And that too was also a falsehood, because they shut down the Justice Committee hearings. Why? Because they are doing everything they can to protect the key people around the Prime Minister's office who interfered with and attempted to obstruct justice. And this is the fundamental issue that we have to talk about. Ben Chin, who's a public office holder, who still has his job, has not been brought forward to committee. But Ben Chin went to the former Attorney General and told her that she had to change direction and bring in this deferred public prosecution. Otherwise, he told her that, quote, SNC, they will leave Montreal, and it's the Quebec election right now. Well, we know now from SNC executives that they never said they were going to leave Montreal. So when a public office holder presents a lie in order to interfere with a public prosecution, that could be seen as obstruction. And that would certainly be something that we would expect the Justice Committee to care about, but they shut that down. We had the former clerk of the Privy Council, who's had to give up his position because of his role as a political actor, who went to the former Attorney General and said that there would be all the jobs lost, which we now know was false. To imagine the clerk of the Privy Council making this up in order to interfere with an independent prosecution is shocking. And then he also told her on September 17th that SNC was about to move out of Montreal, which we again now know SNC never said. So this was cooked up in the Prime Minister's office, a series of lies to intimidate the former Attorney General into cutting this deal. And she told him that they were on very, very thin ice, that this was a dangerous ground to be attempting to interfere in the prosecution. So no wonder the Justice Committee doesn't want this heard, because of the damaging, corrosive effect on the Prime Minister's credibility, because it was the judgments that he was making. That we have on December 5th, Jerry Butts saying that he didn't like the law. It was a Harper law, that he could just somehow ignore it. And then he said, when she told him the former Attorney General was warning him about political interference, he says, we don't get through this without interference. Now, unfortunately, Jerry Butts has left, but Katie Telford's still there. And Katie Telford said she wasn't interested in the question of legalities. If we don't have people who care about the rule of law. They should not be anywhere near the exercise of legislative authority. And this is a question the Prime Minister needs to be asked. This is why the Justice Committee should have done its work, but they didn't, because they have become hand puppets of the Prime Minister's office and have disgraced their position and have left us now open with the OECD. What do we tell the OECD when Canada is willing to remove the Attorney General, that we have a Prime Minister who's willing to blow through the President of the Treasury Board, the former Attorney General, his Chief of Staff, the Clerk of the Privy Council, in order to push through a deferred public prosecution that the prosecutor said SNC was not eligible for, and to stand up day after day in the House still suggesting that they're going to go through with this, that they got themselves a new Attorney General, and they're still talking about moving forward. And I find this fascinating. Just what is this Prime Minister willing to do to get this deferred public prosecution? He's burnt his bridges on reconciliation. He's burnt his bridges as the feminist MP Prime Minister. He's burnt his bridges with Canadians in terms of trust. But he is still doggedly pursuing the deferred public prosecution, even though the independent Office of the Public Prosecution had to set up a Twitter account and say that they had to remain independent. That is the issue that the OECD is concerned about. The OECD is saying, how is it you cannot have international rules of law where companies can go and bribe officials around the world? And SNC has been barred for 10 years by the World Bank for corrupt practices. But if they're going to be charged in their home jurisdiction, they can't just call into the Prime Minister's office and say, make it go away. And that's the issue here, which is why we have 5 former Attorney Generals asking for a police investigation into the actions of the Prime Minister's office. Why? Because former Attorney General for Ontario, Liberal Michael Bryan, said he had never seen such a brazen and reckless abuse of authority. So we need the former Attorney General to be able to speak, to respond certainly to the testimony of Gerald Butts, to explain what happened in the period when she was removed. We need those questions answered, and the Prime Minister needs to understand that his credibility is getting further and further eroded. And I heard the Liberal voice for the SNC scandal today tell us that they now have a special advisor. Oh my God, how do we explain to the OECD that the Prime Minister idea of a special advisor is to take someone off the Liberal fundraising circuit who's out raising money for the Liberal Party right now to come in and oversee this, and that will be a robust alternative to an independent all-party investigation? It doesn't cut it. And until we have all the participants in this case brought forward, until we have an opportunity to understand just how far the Prime Minister was willing to go to subvert the law, to obstruct justice, to have key staff like the Finance Minister and his staff who are interfering, until they are brought accountable, we will be seen by the OECD and other international bodies as some kind of backwoods crony kingdom for the Prime Minister and the small group around him to protect the CEOs of a company that are not eligible for the deferred public prosecution. And these CEOs have themselves said that the 9,000 jobs are not at risk. And I will close on this, Madam Speaker. Just before this case broke, we had all the senior Liberal cabinet ministers and all the senior people from all the officials participate in a special function with SNC-Lavalin, who are the gatekeepers of the great privatization agenda of this government. The jobs we're talking about are public jobs. They're jobs that are done by civil servants. They're jobs that are done in municipalities. And we have this government, knowing that they were facing charges, hosting a major event with all key Liberal cabinet ministers and SNC, it shows that they never took the issue of the rule of law seriously for a single minute, and that is what has damaged this Prime Minister's credibility, and this is what's going to drag the Prime Minister down until he comes clean with Canadians about the interference and obstruction in his office.
And comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I'd like to talk about accountability and trustworthiness and so forth that the member alluded to a great deal. Let me quote something, and this comes actually from the Canadian Press. The Federal Court of Appeal says it can't intervene in a case where more than 6 NDP MPs were ordered to repay $2.7 million in expenses the House of Commons says was actually for partisan purposes. Madam Speaker, that's being very kind. I was here when the NDP, including their previous leader, stole from Canadians. Madam Speaker, and that was the bottom line. So I'm wondering if my friend, who seems to be so focused on integrity and every time he stands up, virtually from day one in 2015, talking about integrity and accountability, yet the NDP continue to want to deny that they broke the law when in fact they did. Will he admit that maybe that the NDP should be paying back those tax dollars?
I do want to remind the Parliamentary Secretary to choose his words wisely when he's speaking in the House, and would hope that he would take back the word that he had mentioned that he very well knows isn't allowed in the House.
Madam Speaker, without reservation, I would take back the word stolen.
The Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
Speaker, it's not often that I cross the chair here, but I'm very surprised you would ask him to use wise words. This is the Ezra Levant of the Liberal Party, so I'm never surprised at what he comes up with. And I always know that when he goes there, they really are now scrambling. They're now in the deep, deep waters. So I've just asked my friend, why doesn't he write a letter to the OECD and say, you know what, it's not that we were involved in interfering in an international bribery investigation, it was the bad NDP who 6 years ago did something we didn't like. That's the kind of thing that makes people realize that this government is in deep, deep, deep water, because they can't answer. They shut down committees. They will not allow the former Attorney General to testify. And heck, they've lost a number of cabinet ministers. They lost another backbencher today. I would say he needs to really look and try and start doing the healing in his own benches.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We watched as the new Prime Minister chose his cabinet, and he got up and defended his Attorney General because he had full confidence in this Attorney General. Yep. He knew that she was the one that the Liberal government wanted as their Attorney General. But he found out that that Attorney General didn't simply hearken to every word that was inappropriate to him. She stood her ground. And to my colleague who gave his speech, the issue with the former Attorney General standing her ground and coming to the Justice Committee, now the Liberal government backed away from it. Now, I just want to, he talked about the 5 Attorney Generals that have spoken up, and I'm just wondering if he would perhaps go a little more on that. The one Liberal, I believe he was a Liberal Attorney General from Queen's Park, from here in Ontario, said that if any leader or any premier ever asked him to do such a thing, he would immediately pick up the phone, dial 911, and call the police. And that is the significance of what we saw this Prime Minister doing. And I'm just wondering if, you know, if he feels that Canadians have a full understanding of the depth of the law that has been broken here.
Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay has just a little under a minute to respond.
Oh, sorry about that. Well, I have enormous respect for the fact that the former Attorney General said this is wrong. That's about integrity. I have had many disagreements with the former Attorney General about policy, but when you're actually willing to stand up with your career and say, I will not break the law, that takes integrity. And I'd like to give us another shout out to the former President of the Treasury Board, who I've had enormous respect for and I think is probably the best that we've seen on the Liberal benches. When she says I have to step down, over ethical and constitutional responsibilities. I'm actually shocked when I look at the rest of the Liberals who sit there and think that it's perfectly okay to remain supporting a Justice Committee that shuts down an investigation that has cost them two of their most credible women cabinet ministers.